measure passed by 5.3 million votes, 55.6% in favor against 44% against. Since then, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Alaska have legalized marijuana use. This year on the ballot in 2016, Florida, Maine, Nevada have a ballot measure which would legalize recreational marijuana use. Now, California Proposition 64, which will be decided on November 8, 2016 by the voters of the state, have placed on the ballot something called the Adult Use of Marijuana Act. The long-form ballot summary is available on the internet, but in summary, it legalizes marijuana under state law for use by adults 21 or older. It designates state agencies to license and regulate the marijuana industry. It imposes a state tax of 15% on retail sales of marijuana and state cultivation taxes on marijuana of $9.25 per ounce of flowers and $2.75 per ounce of leaves. It exempts medical marijuana from some taxation. It establishes packaging, labeling, advertising, and marketing standards for restrictions. It prohibits marketing and advertising marijuana directly to minors. It allows local regulation and taxation of marijuana, and it authorizes resentencing and destruction of records for prior marijuana convictions. According to the website, as of today, September 1st, 2016, organizations in support are listing over $11 million in support of this measure, and they are listing against this measure $200,000. So that's a difference of $11 million being used to support the measure and $200,000 as against. The current Medical Cannabis Act, it provides for 17 different types of licenses, and it varies by the scale and size of business for cultivation, manufacture, testing, dispensary, distribution, and transporter. It also, to prevent vertical integration, prevents licensees from holding more than 2 separate categories of licenses. Qualified patients are exempt from state license requirements if cultivating less than 100 square feet for personal medical use. If I may repeat that, under the current law, qualified patients may cultivate up to 100 square feet. And also primary caregivers with 5 or fewer patients are allowed to cultivate up to 500 square feet. So despite all these different background laws, this city did not have anything in the books which defined and controlled cultivation as well as manufacture. The proposed ordinance for your consideration has various categories and elements. It, for example, on page 2, requires good cause for purpose of refusing or denying an initial license. It provides the city with the ability to judge an applicant on good moral character, and is defined in this proposed ordinance to prohibit those that have prior felony convictions, and that includes anyone in ownership. It also would regulate transporters, meaning that anyone who brings or transport cannabis into the city would be regulated as well, so that way no one can traffic cannabis without proper license. The permitted uses would only be allowed after the city investigates, verifies, approves, and issues a development agreement. Now, this development agreement would give the city the ability to control the site plan, certificate of occupancy, zoning clearance, and any other authorized uses. And as I'll explain in detail, this is important for security measures. The development agreement itself would contain components, or should contain components, for public outreach, education, community service, payment of fees and other charges that the applicant would agree to. Section 434-6 of the proposed license would limit the licensed premises to no more than 5 at any one point. The manufacturing sites, cultivation sites, would be restricted in where they could be placed in the city. The state standard is 600 feet from a school. This proposed ordinance would go further and would prohibit the sites from daycare centers, youth centers, and also away from a residential zone. So the proposed ordinance also would prohibit any exterior evidence of manufacturing of cannabis. From the outside, therefore, there can be no cannabis visible. The cultivation of medical cannabis in the outdoors would be prohibited. Currently, as I mentioned, our ordinance doesn't have anything on the books prohibiting outside cultivation. This proposed ordinance would prohibit that. And then the cultivation would be limited to square footage as permitted by state law. The non-conforming uses such as any illegal dispensaries or any potential site that doesn't conform with this rule would be considered a non-conforming use and could be shut down. Currently, as I mentioned, our ordinance doesn't have any particular way of enforcing the prohibition of outside cultivation. The proposed ordinance goes on to prohibit any applicant from selling, transferring, pledging, assigning, granting an option, or otherwise disposing of the ownership or interest of the medical cannabis business. That means that every person who applies on the application must continue to operate and maintain ownership. The location of any potential site would be limited to a geographical area and would be pre-approved. The actual applicant cannot change from that location or expand or add more space without prior approval. The proposed ordinance also would prohibit any subletting, meaning that once an applicant applies and if this measure is approved, then no applicant could sublet to anyone else. The proposed ordinance also prohibits altering or modifying the location, as I mentioned. And the proposed ordinance allows the city to control what could be considered any material change, which would be an increase or decrease in the total physical size or capacity, the increase in common entryways, doorways, passages, installation of fixtures, anything that would affect the manufacturing and cultivation would be limited. Now, the application process would be created if this ordinance is approved, so that the city only processes applications where all of these conditions are met. Some of these conditions, and they're laid out in the proposed ordinance section 4-34.9, but some of them are: the applicant cannot make any false or misleading statements. The applicant's business must be properly organized. The applicant's facility must comply with all building, zoning, health, and safety provisions of the code. The applicant must be 21 years of age or older, no minors allowed. The applicant or any of the officers cannot have any prior violent felony or misdemeanor involving fraud, deceit, embezzlement, moral turpitude, or illegal use, possession, transportation, distribution, or anything that's prohibited under federal law. The applicants themselves cannot have any licensed physician making patient recommendations for medical marijuana. In other words, the cultivators and manufacturers cannot be enabling the business directly. The fees in the application will be created by council or approved by council if this measure is approved, so that in the end, every applicant must conform with each one of these qualifications. And finally, the applicant must demonstrate and seek to promote the health, safety, morals, and general welfare of residents and businesses of the city. There's some general security requirements. I'll go through them, but they're fairly rigorous. If this would be approved, the city would require continuous hours of digitally recorded documentation in a format that's approved and available to the city manager as well as to the police. The cameras must be in use 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. The business space has to be alarmed with a reliable commercial space. Every storage area must be locked. That includes trash cans, trash bins, or any disposal cans. Every single window must be secured. As I mentioned, no cannabis activity can be visible from the outside. The licensee also must implement a system to track the cultivation and manufacturing of cannabis in order to prevent any more growth that is not being tracked. The security system also shall include alarm systems, recordings, monitorings of alarm activity, which logs should be available to the city and to the police. The video surveillance requirements are listed in subsection D. They're fairly rigorous, but briefly, they require that all video surveillance records shall be held in confidence by all employees. They have to be made available upon request. And the video surveillance system must be approved by the city. The placement of cameras is also a concern. The cameras must be placed within 20 feet of all points of ingress and egress. Therefore, the city will track anyone coming in or coming out. The system also should be capable of recording all predetermined surveillance areas and any lighting conditions, meaning that all areas of ingress and egress must be well lit. There can be no dark activity inside any proposed site. The surveillance equipment has to be housed in a designated locked and secure room where only certain individuals have access, therefore that prevents tampering. These recordings must be kept longer than industry standards. The proposed ordinance currently requires that everything be kept for at least 30 days. And the date and time must also be embedded in the surveillance equipment. As I mentioned, the application, processing fee, and permit fee will all be subject to being developed so that the city does not come out of pocket to cover any of these regulation standards. Are there any questions I can address regarding this proposed ordinance?
Yes, Mr. City Attorney. There's a few things that I want clarification on for the public. One is, can you explain the difference between what the state will allow at the outdoors type 3 versus the indoors type 3, the maximum amount of square footage? And if I'm reading the proposed ordinance today, it does not allow for outdoors, correct?
Correct. So the state, in some regions of the state, would allow outdoor cultivation up to 1 acre. It's approximately 44,000 square foot. The city of Lynwood, in this proposed ordinance, would prohibit any outdoor growth or cultivation or manufacturing. The Type 3A license in the state level limits indoor growth to 22,000 square feet.
So in this, if I'm understanding correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if the city allows for up to 5 licenses and we only allow for indoors, that means each one of those 5 licenses would only be permitted to cultivate up to 22,000 square feet. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. And then the other question, can we change it from 600 feet to 1,000 feet?
Yes. Are you talking about the distance from a school?
Yes, and daycares as well.
But didn't he say that the state regulation is 600 and that the proposed is what again, Mr. Garcia?
Correct. The current state standard is 600 for schools. This one goes further in that it also applies that distance requirement to both youth centers and daycare centers.
I just for extra, I would like to increase it to 1,000 for me to feel comfortable away from any schools, youth centers, or child care facilities. The other question I have is how much approximately has it been reviewed that each license can create in revenue for the city?
My own preliminary research and inquiry from our office, and based upon offers from other areas, has been that nearby cities have asked for anywhere from $75,000 to $250,000 per development agreement per year to cover certain charges that are specified in the development agreement.
And in reading this ordinance, this first reading, and I guess I'm just trying to understand how things would work. Can we earmark how we want any fundings generated from this? Or is this also susceptible to the 3/4 majority? Would it be considered an earmark? I don't know, you know what I'm trying to ask.
I believe we could condition the granting of any permit based on the development agreement that contains certain elements, so we can specify those right now.
Through the development agreement. For now, yeah. If I come up with more questions, I'll let you know.
Thank you. First of all, the question to the city attorney is, why not ban this completely pending the Proposition 64 in November 8th? That's the first question. Why allow to exist in our city instead of saying like the neighboring cities are not, they're banning not only the dispensaries but also the cultivation and manufacture of marijuana. That's one thing. The other thing, Mr. City Attorney, you didn't mention, you did mention that it's 600 feet away from the school, daycare, and all that stuff. But what you failed to mention, and I don't know why you did that this, if it's allowed by City Council, it can be 50 feet from a residential. In other words, if I live in this area, across the street I can have this business open, and I can see all the whole activity that's going on. That some residents complain about the smell and everything that's going on, the manufacturing, the in and out of the vehicles. So it's 50 feet from a residential, anything that is residential, as I know it. Okay, they can increase it to 1,000 for schools and daycares, but will it still exist if this council approves it? 50 feet, 50, from your home. Okay, they only speculated on the possible revenue that will bring to the city, but yet council has to bring it back and then kind of set the prices for it. But how do you account this? Are you going to have a city employee sitting at their gate, accounting for everything in order to know what is it that they're doing, how much they're selling, how much they're transporting? So I don't see this a good thing for our city at this time. If the state passes this measure, it comes with some restrictions. So I was against it from the beginning, from whenever they started rumoring about this. In the city of Lynwood, currently, we have more than 3 dispensaries clandestinely. Okay? We already have the people that sell this in our city, and the city has opted not to enforce our regulations that we already have. In 2013, I was a mayor, and there was one on Alameda on 112th Street. And this property was owned by one of our former developers that came and bought this property and opened it, and very conveniently changed the storefront, who was operating it. They operated in Lynwood, and they keep on operating in Lynwood. I can say that there's about 3 of them already at this point. Dispensaries, the things that people oppose the most. So now you're going to have the supplier in the city of Lynwood, and you're going to have the dispensaries in the city of Lynwood, and the consumers are going to come to the city of Lynwood, and see, Compton rejected it. Southgate doesn't have it. Hyde Park did it. How did Hyde Park did it? To me, they got corrupted. That's bottom line. The federal government prohibits this type of activity. If people have the need for this, is my opinion, they can go to Hyde Park. They can go up to Los Angeles and buy it legally. I've been following this story in Los Angeles Times about this whole thing about people say that, well, you can drive under the influence of marijuana, but how the police, we can have a deputy to testify, how they gonna measure your toxicity? There's no way so far. If you listen to NPR radio, they have large discussions about all this. Okay? So you're gonna allow your council members to permit this without doing the proper research. The research was done by the legal attorney. Yeah, he was told to do so. That's his job. If I give him a task, he'll do it. Okay, he'll do what I asked him to do. Do a research on this. All I need is a blessing of another council member for the city attorney to get the act and see what they can do about it. Now, we have 5 council members here, and I know some of the residents said, you 5 council members. No, I am the one that put it on the social media to alert the community that this is what's going on. Come and voice your concerns and hear the facts. The city attorney very conveniently omitted some of the specific information. Why? Why the city attorney didn't say 50 homes from your home, 50 feet from your home? Why didn't the city attorney did it? Why he opted not to say that? Yeah, it's okay around schools. But like I said, you got about 3 dispensaries in the city of Lynwood right now, guaranteed. Okay? And now we're going to have the growers, and then we're going to speculate how we're going to regulate this in the future. Even you put in what do they call the horse, the carriage in front of the horse? That's a bad business, people. This is something you need to hold your city council accountable, that they need to put this. If they went and had a public hearing about the trash rates, they went and imposed all these regulations because there was some modifications about some increase, okay, that I was supposed to also, okay. What about this? This requires community input. This requires the so-called community forums to inform the community. This is what's going on. What are the possible sites? Is it next to my house? Okay, you ask that question. Is it on the west side where I live, and maybe the mayor lives? Okay, why not on the east side of the city of Lynwood? The manufacturing part, where I believe this might take place, is around Santa Fe, Martin Luther King, and Fernwood, that area. Maybe somewhere else, I don't know. Okay, but this is the questions that I question the city attorney and my fellow council members. Is this what you want for your community? Were you elected to do just this? To fill your pockets with money? Because I'm telling you, I will not put this in the agenda unless someone convinces me. But if it's bad for the youth, if it's bad for a community, I wouldn't even talk about it. And you know what? But let's have council make their decision based on the research that they have done tonight and throughout the weeks. But they were elected the same as me, and you are the ones that will hold them responsible if you don't like them. If you support it, support them. Okay, but I'm not in favor. Not bit. I need to look at more options to see what's going to happen with the state if it passes. Okay, if it passes. But now the city was already authorizing something that is against the federal law. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I did have one question, and actually, thank you, Mr. Latona, for reminding me.
And I can respond to those questions.
Yeah, but in regards to the residential, is 200 feet too much? Would that be an unreasonable request?
So to answer that question, the consideration there is that you're discriminating against smaller office space. In other words, you would be favoring huge cannabis cultivation sites. The reason being is because buildings that are within 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet of any residence in this city would be prohibited. So then you would then be favoring the big warehouses. That's a policy consideration for council. When I ran this past staff development services, I asked them for the width of a typical street so that any potential manufacturing location could be considered by council. So the idea there was not to favor or discriminate against small buildings.
And can we limit it to the industrial manufacturer zoning area only?
That's what this does, council.
So we're only limiting it to that area.
It's defined in the proposed ordinance. It's light commercial, medium commercial, heavy commercial, and planned commercial development and manufacturing.
Okay, I guess for me, when I hear the word commercial, I'm thinking retail areas, and that's the part that I'm very strongly trying to stay away from. I'm not talking about the small mall strip or like the low retail center. I'm very specifically talking to the industrial manufacturing area. How do we limit that?
The most direct way is to produce a map of the locations you have within the city. I reviewed that with development services, and as I mentioned, the idea was not to favor the big buildings, but to try to be even-handed with respect to all buildings. Nonetheless, that is something that council can change at any point.
And then just in the spirit of, since we're talking about having public meetings and hearings, I do agree. I tried having a few of those when we were dealing with our trash contract. And I remember being turned down for that. But the reason, just let the record reflect that we weren't sure. We're still not sure what's going to happen. And let me look at the camera and smile. Thank you, Ms. Vasquez. I appreciate it. So basically, there's a lot that needs to be questioned. How do we handle this matter? How do we move forward? And I will take the blame for everybody who wants to know who brought this to the council. It was me. Be mad at me. Today was evident of the fact that there's so much misinformation out there. There was, of all the statements that I heard, the only one that I really thought was genuine was the one patient that said, I use it, but I don't want to have to buy it here. I can definitely respect the not in my backyard attitude. I totally get it. Which is why dispensaries were banned in our community, because it's one of those not in our backyard mentalities. The reality is that we are currently experiencing, as Mr. Alatorre stated, the black market of the prohibition of marijuana. When you don't allow things to happen legally, they will find a way to do things illegally, making things harder. When you create an avenue to allow for things to become legal, then the people that are having to pay the licenses and the struggles of doing their business legitimately, they tend to help you tell on the people that are doing things illegally, because they don't think it's fair that they're having to pay all their licenses while other people will just come in and do things illegally. Let's rewind the tape, since we have political science professors, majors, and history buffs. Back in the day, when Mr. Al Capone was not a famous American gangster,